Let's talk about the variable file node. This node is also known as the Var File Node. The Var File Node is located in the sources palette. You can use the variable file node to read data from free field text files. These are files where records have the same number of fields but a varied number of characters. They're also known as delimited text files. As an example of what the Var File Node does, because it's a source node, it allows you to import all or some fields from a particular source. In this case, the source is typically going to be something like Notepad or WordPad or potentially even Excel. Let's go through an example of how to read data from a free field text file. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to the sources palette and we're going to bring the variable file node onto the canvas. We're going to edit this node and we're going to link it up to a data set. So we'll click on the triple dots next to the file box. We'll find the data set that we want to bring in, we'll select it and open it up. So now we've linked up this data set to the source node. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to notice what the preview looks like. Notice that in the first row we have the names of our fields, and starting in the second row we have our data. That's how we want our data to be set up for this type of file that we're bringing in. Now notice that one option that you have here is to read field names from the file. If your field names are in the first row, make sure that that option is selected. If your first row is not the header, then deselect that option so that generic names like field 1, field 2, and so on are going to be given to the different fields in your data set. The next thing you want to do is you want to specify the type of delimiters that you're using. Now notice that each case is on a new line, so make sure that the new line delimiter is selected. Also notice that each variable or field is separated by a comma, so make sure that the comma delimiter is selected as well. Comma happens to be the default, and that's what we happen to have in this data set, but it could have been something else like a tab or a space or something else that we may have specified. We'll talk about the other options in a little bit. At this point, let's just click OK to make sure that we're reading the data correctly. We're going to go down to the output palette and we're going to connect our source node over to a table. We're going to run the stream to make sure that we're reading the data correctly. And here you can see that we have 13 fields, a little more than 3,000 records, and we can take a look at the data, and it looks like the data was read correctly. We'll close out of this window. Now let's edit the source node so we can take a look at some of the other options that are available. Now if your data is in more than one line, you might want to specify the number of fields that each case is made up of. So rather than specifying a delimiter as a new line, you might specify that 50 fields, for example, make up a case. So the first 50 fields will be counted, that'll be case 1, the next 50 fields will be case 2, and so forth. Now another thing that you could do is you have the option of to skip header characters. That's basically, here you would specify the number of characters to ignore before the first record. You also have the option to strip lead and trail spaces. These are basically to remove blanks, and they can be spaces to the left, to the right, both, or none, depending on what it is that you need to get rid of. You also can specify the encoding system. That's really the text encoding system that is specified for the stream. Another option that you have is to specify what you want to do with invalid characters. These are characters that are not recognized by the system. So you could discard them, which is a default, or you could replace them with a specific value. Other options that are available is what do you want to specify as your decimal system. You could go with whatever the system default is, or you could specify periods or commas. The lines to scan for type, what that does is you have to specify the number of rows that you're going to scan in your data so that you can set the field type. The default is set to 50. This is generally a pretty good number. Sometimes you may have to modify it if you have a very varied data set, or if your data is sorted in an unusual way. But usually you could leave that value the way it is. Another option that you have is to recognize dates and times. So as long as you're using one of the formats specified in Modeler, Modeler will be able to recognize the different date and time formats that you've specified. You'll also want to specify what you want to do with quotes. You could discard single and double quotes, or you could decide that you want to pair and discard them, or you want to include them as part of the text. So those are additional options as well. We'll close out of this window. We'll just click OK. So that's an example of how you might use the variable file node to allow you to bring in delimited text data.